People always underestimate quiet women. I've been quiet my whole life. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I learned early that the ones who talk the loudest rarely have anything worth hearing. My mother taught me that. She also taught me to keep good records, pay attention to what people do instead of what they say, and never let anyone see you cry unless you mean for them to see it. I'm 62 years old. I drive a 2009 Buick LaCrosse with a dent in the rear bumper from when Richard backed into the mailbox the week before he died. I never fixed it. Some mornings, I walk outside with my coffee, run my fingers over that dent, and pretend he's still in the kitchen burning toast. I live in the same house we bought 40 years ago in Willow Creek, just outside Charlotte. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a backyard with a magnolia tree Richard planted when Samantha was born. The gutters need cleaning. The porch light flickers when it rains. I could afford to fix these things. I could afford to buy a new house entirely, 10 new houses if I wanted. But that's not who I am. Richard and I built everything together. He was the dreamer. I was the one who read the contracts. He'd find the opportunities. I'd find the loopholes. By the time he passed 3 years ago, we had quietly accumulated a fortune most people in our lives never suspected. $50 million in a family trust, an 8% stake in Continental Atlantic Airlines, back from when Richard invested in a college friend's crazy idea in 1987. We never flaunted it. Richard wore the same 3 suits to church for 20 years. I still use coupons at the grocery store. It wasn't about being cheap. It was about remembering where we came from. But somewhere along the way, our daughter forgot. The morning Patricia came to visit, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. There was a stack of mail beside me, including a bill from the electric company I hadn't opened. Not because I couldn't pay it. Because some days, the small tasks feel impossible when you're the only one left to do them. The doorbell rang. I didn't get up immediately. I knew who it was. Patricia always visited on Tuesdays now. Ever since Richard died, she'd developed a sudden interest in my well-being. Aunt Eleanor, Patricia's voice rang through the door. It's just us. Howard's here too. I took my time walking to the door. Let them wait. Patricia Gaines is my niece, my late brother Frank's daughter. She's 55 now, with the kind of highlighted blonde hair that costs $300 every 6 weeks, and a smile that never quite reaches her eyes. She married Howard when she was 23. He's an accountant, quiet, methodical, the kind of man who notices where you keep your checkbook. You look tired, Patricia said as she stepped inside, kissing my cheek with lips that felt like paper. Have you been sleeping? Well enough. You know, I was just telling Howard on the drive over. She glanced at her husband, who was already drifting toward my study, that you've seemed a little forgetful lately. Nothing serious, just little things. Last week you called me twice about the same recipe. I hadn't called her twice, I'd called her once. She was the one who called back, fishing for information about Richard's estate. Did I? I said, letting my voice waver slightly. I don't remember that. Patricia's eyes flickered with something I might have mistaken for concern if I didn't know better. See, that's exactly what I mean. Maybe you should see someone, a doctor, just to check. Howard emerged from the hallway. His hands were empty, but I noticed the way his gaze moved to the filing cabinet in my study, the same cabinet where I kept, or used to keep, my bank statements. Everything all right, Howard? I asked. Just admiring the photos, he said. Richard had a good eye. He did. They stayed for 45 minutes. Patricia talked about Samantha's upcoming birthday, about how expensive Tyler's college tuition was, about how family should stick together in hard times. Howard said almost nothing. He didn't need to. I saw him notice the stack of mail on my kitchen table. I saw him notice that one envelope was missing from where it should have been, my monthly bank statement, which I had moved to a safe deposit box 3 days earlier. After they left, I stood at the window and watched their silver Lexus pull away. Then, I picked up the phone and called the only person in the world I still trusted completely. Margaret, I said when she answered. They took the bait. Margaret Holloway has been my attorney and best friend since we were roommates at UNC in 1981. She's 64 now, a feared estate litigator who once made a judge cry. She's been helping me prepare for this moment for 6 months. How bad? She asked. Howard was practically drooling on my filing cabinet. Patricia's already laying the groundwork for the competency angle. You seem forgetful, Aunt Eleanor. Right on schedule. And Samantha, I paused. This was the part that still made my chest ache. She called yesterday. She wants to take me on a trip, a family vacation. Paris, Rome, the Swiss Alps. Bonding time, she said, before it's too late. Margaret was quiet for a moment. You think it's part of the plan? I think my daughter wants to get me alone, far from home, and convince me to sign something I shouldn't. I thought of Richard then, the last real conversation we had before his heart gave out. We were sitting on the back porch, watching the fireflies, and he grabbed my hand tight. Ellie, he said, Samantha thinks love is a transaction. I don't know where we went wrong, but you need to see her clearly. Promise me. I promised. And then he was gone, and I was alone with a daughter who looked at me like an obstacle. I'm going on the trip, I told Margaret. I'll pay for everything. First-class flights, 5-star hotels. I'll give them every opportunity to prove me wrong. And if they don't? I looked at the family photo on my mantel. Samantha at 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning on Richard's shoulders. Tyler as a newborn in my arms. A lifetime of love, reduced to line items on a spreadsheet. Then I'll have everything I need, I said. I'm bringing copies of all the documents, the bank records showing Patricia and Howard's transfers, the draft of the competency paperwork Howard prepared. All of it. I hung up and walked to the window. The magnolia tree was blooming, white petals catching the afternoon light. I would give them every opportunity to prove me wrong. I prayed they would, but I packed my evidence just in case. Charlotte Douglas International Airport smelled like burnt coffee and anxiety. I stood in the check-in line with my small carry-on, the same navy blue suitcase I'd taken on my honeymoon with Richard in 1982, while Samantha tapped furiously at her phone and Mark complained about the wait. This is ridiculous, Mark muttered, adjusting the collar of his jacket. It was new. I recognized the brand from the charge on the credit card statement he didn't know I still received copies of. $1,400 for a jacket to wear on a trip I was funding. The line's moving, Tyler said quietly. He was standing slightly apart from his parents, hands shoved in his pockets, looking at the departure board like he wished he were anywhere else. When we reached the counter, the agent smiled and began processing our tickets. First class to Paris, connecting to Geneva, then Rome. I'd booked it all myself, or so I thought. Mrs. Miller, the agent said, her smile faltering. I'm seeing a small discrepancy here. Your ticket appears to be for economy class. I blinked. I'm sorry? The other 3 passengers are confirmed for first class, but your booking shows economy. It must have been an error in the system. I looked at Samantha. She didn't look up from her phone. Oh, that's so strange, she said, her voice flat. I'm sure it was a glitch. Mom, you don't mind, do you? It's just 8 hours. You always say you don't need anything fancy. Mark snorted. Besides, first class is wasted on someone who falls asleep before takeoff anyway. No offense, Eleanor. No offense. As if those words had ever preceded anything that wasn't offensive. I felt Tyler's eyes on me. When I glanced at him, he looked away quickly, his jaw tight. Of course, I said, keeping my voice light. I don't mind at all. I minded. Not because of the seat. I've slept on worse, but because of what it meant. The first cut. The first test of how much disrespect I would swallow. I smiled at the agent and took my economy boarding pass. Let them think I didn't notice. Let them think I was a foolish old woman clutching her old lady purse. Yes, I heard Mark whisper that to Samantha as we walked to security. Let them underestimate me. That was the whole point. Paris was beautiful and cruel. The city hadn't changed much since Richard and I visited in 1985. We were young then, not yet rich, splitting a croissant on the steps of Sacré-Cœur because we could only afford one. He kissed me there, tasting like butter and coffee, and promised me we'd come back someday in style. I came back, but not like this. The hotel was stunning. A restored mansion in the 8th arrondissement with marble floors and chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. Samantha, Mark, and Tyler had adjoining suites on the 5th floor, overlooking the courtyard garden. My room was on the 3rd floor, facing the alley. No balcony. "They must have run out of suites," Samantha said when I mentioned it at check-in. She didn't look sorry. "But your room is nice too, right? Very. Cozy." Cozy, a word people use when they mean small. That first evening, I waited in my cozy room for the dinner invitation. I'd seen the reservation confirmation in Samantha's email, a Michelin-starred restaurant near the Louvre, 7 o'clock. I put on my good dress, the navy one Richard always liked, and waited. At 7:15, my phone buzzed. "So sorry, Mom. We thought you'd be tired from the flight. Mark made reservations for 3. Get some rest, and we'll see you at breakfast." I read the message twice. Then I took off my good dress, hung it back in the closet, and walked out into the Paris evening alone. I found a small cafe 3 blocks from the hotel. Red awning, wobbly tables, a waiter who called me Madame, and didn't rush me when I ordered just a bowl of soup and a glass of wine. I was finishing my bread when I heard Mark's voice. He was standing outside the cafe, phone pressed to his ear, pacing. He hadn't seen me. I was tucked in the corner by the window, half hidden by a potted plant. "Howard, relax. Everything's on schedule." A pause. "Yes, she's behaving exactly like we expected. Docile, confused. Samantha's been laying the groundwork beautifully. Little comments about her memory, her confusion. By the time we get back, the narrative will be airtight." Another pause, then a laugh. 2 weeks, tops. Then we file the paperwork, and this whole charade is over. He hung up and walked away, whistling. I set down my wine glass. My hand was trembling, not from fear, but from the effort of staying still, of not running after him and demanding to know what kind of man plots to steal from the woman who raised his wife. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was patience. I paid my bill, walked back to the hotel, and wrote down every word I'd heard in the small notebook I kept in my purse. The phone in my room rang once that night, around midnight. By the time I picked up, the line was dead. No message. Just silence. The pattern continued across Europe. In Geneva, they took a private helicopter tour of the Alps. I learned about it from the concierge when I asked why the lobby had been so quiet that morning. "Your family departed at 7, Mrs. Miller. They said you preferred to rest." I did not prefer to rest. I preferred not to be abandoned. In Rome, we stayed near the Spanish Steps in a hotel with rooftop views of the entire city. I paid for all of it, the suites, the meals, the spa treatments Samantha and Mark charged to the room. I kept every receipt. I documented everything, the timestamps when they left without me. The texts Samantha accidentally showed me on her phone, conversations with Patricia about Aunt Eleanor's decline. The way Mark spoke to me in public, loud enough for strangers to hear, as if I were a child who had wandered away from her caretaker. "Eleanor, try to keep up. Eleanor, did you take your pills today? Eleanor, maybe you should sit this one out. Too many stairs." Each humiliation was a piece of evidence. Each cruelty was a brick in the wall I was building around them. On our last night in Rome, Tyler found me on the hotel terrace. I was sitting alone, watching the sunset paint the city gold and amber, when I heard footsteps behind me. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking so much like Richard at that age that my heart cracked. "Grandma," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." I turned to face him. "What is it, sweetheart?" His mouth opened. I saw the words forming: confession, apology, warning, something real. Then Samantha's voice cut through the air. "Tyler, there you are. We're leaving for dinner in 10 minutes. Go get changed. Tyler flinched. He looked at me one more time, his eyes wet, then turned and walked away without another word. I sat on that terrace for a long time after he left. Later that night, while Samantha and Mark were at dinner, I let myself into their suite. The hotel key system was easy enough to navigate when you were the one paying for the rooms. I wasn't proud of what I did next. But Richard taught me that sometimes you need to see the cards your opponent is holding. Samantha's bag was on the bed, open, careless. Inside, beneath a silk scarf and the Italian fashion magazine, I found a manila folder. My hands knew what it was before my eyes confirmed it. Competency evaluation paperwork. My name typed neatly at the top. Signature lines at the bottom, blank, waiting. A cover letter from Howard detailing the evidence of my cognitive decline. Forgetfulness, confusion, erratic financial decisions. Attached was a draft letter to my bank requesting emergency power of attorney. The return flight was in 2 days. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was just a tired old woman counting down her final days of freedom. They had no idea I was counting down to something else entirely. The morning we were supposed to fly home, I woke at 4 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. I lay in my narrow bed, the cozy room, 3rd floor, alley view, and listened to Rome waking up outside my window, motorinos buzzing through the streets, shutters creaking open, the distant clatter of cafe owners setting out chairs. In 6 hours, we would be at the airport. In 18 hours, we would be back in Charlotte. And within 2 weeks, if the paperwork in Samantha's bag was any indication, I would be declared mentally incompetent, stripped of control over the fortune Richard and I spent 40 years building. I touched the folder in my carry-on. The copies I'd made in the hotel business center at 2 a.m. while my family slept in their luxury suites. Bank records, transfer logs, Howard's draft competency petition. Photographs of every receipt from this trip, the helicopter tours I wasn't invited on, the Michelin-starred dinners I ate alone, the spa treatments charged to my card without my knowledge. Everything I needed. I got up, showered, and dressed in the same navy dress I'd worn that first night in Paris. The one Richard loved. I put on my mother's pearl earrings and a touch of the lavender hand lotion Richard gave me every Christmas for 30 years. The scent still made me feel like he was nearby, watching over me. I was going to need him today. Rome Fiumicino Airport was a cathedral of chaos. Tourists dragged overstuffed suitcases across gleaming marble floors. Families argued in Italian, in German, in languages I couldn't name. The espresso bar near Terminal 3 smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, and the announcements echoing overhead were incomprehensible symphonies of static. Samantha was already stressed when we arrived. Her hair wasn't cooperating. The taxi had been late. Mark had forgotten his phone charger at the hotel and blamed her for not reminding him, which led to a whispered argument in the security line that stopped the moment they noticed me watching. Tyler walked beside me, silent as he'd been for most of the trip. Since that night on the terrace, since he almost told me something, he'd barely spoken 10 words to me. I didn't push. Whatever battle was happening inside him, he needed to fight it himself. But I saw his hand trembling as he handed his passport to the security agent. I saw the way he kept looking at his mother's phone, then looking away. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know how to stop it. At the gate, I sat apart from them. Samantha was on her phone, typing furiously, occasionally glancing up at me with an expression I couldn't read. Mark paced near the window, pretending to admire the planes on the tarmac. I pulled out my worn paperback, an Agatha Christie I'd read a dozen times, and pretended to read. 30 minutes before boarding, the gate agent called my name. "Mrs. Eleanor Miller, could you please come to the counter?" I marked my page, tucked the book into my purse, and walked to the counter. I could feel Samantha's eyes on my back. The agent was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a name tag that read Julia. She looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Miller," she said quietly, "I'm very sorry, but there seems to be a problem with your ticket." "A problem?" "It's been canceled." The words didn't register at first. Cancelled? That's impossible. I booked this flight myself. Julia turned her monitor toward me, showing the reservation screen. There it was, in plain text. Ticket canceled via Continental Atlantic app. Timestamp 8:47 a.m. User S. Miller. 8:47, 17 minutes ago, while I was sitting at the gate reading my book. My daughter had canceled my ticket while sitting 30 feet away from me. I pulled out my phone. There was a text message waiting, sent at 8:48 a.m. Good luck walking home, you useless old hag. I read it 3 times. Each time, the words cut a little deeper. Useless, old, hag. This was my daughter. The baby I nursed through colic, the toddler whose scraped knees I bandaged, the teenager whose heartbreaks I soothed with ice cream and old movies, the woman I had loved unconditionally for 38 years. Useless old hag. I looked up from my phone. Samantha was watching me from her seat, a small smile playing on her lips. Beside her, Mark stood with his arms crossed, chin lifted, enjoying the show. "Is there a problem, Eleanor?" Mark called out, loud enough for the entire gate area to hear. I didn't answer. He walked toward me, each step a performance. "Let me guess, some kind of mix-up with your ticket?" He shook his head with theatrical disappointment. "You know, this is exactly what we've been worried about. Confusion, memory issues, forgetting to confirm reservations." "I didn't forget anything," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. "Sure you didn't." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hiss that only I could hear. "Stop pretending you're poor and take a taxi like you should, Eleanor. First class is for people who actually have class." He straightened up, smiled at Julia as if they were sharing a private joke, and walked back to Samantha. I stood there, holding my phone with my daughter's message still glowing on the screen, and felt something shift inside me. For 3 years, I had grieved. For 6 months, I had planned. For 10 days, I had endured every humiliation, every snide comment, every deliberate exclusion. I had told myself it was necessary, that I needed to be sure. That maybe, I was wrong about them. I wasn't wrong. I looked at Tyler. He was still in his seat, frozen, his face the color of ash. His eyes met mine, and I saw it all there, the shame, the fear, the desperate wish that he could disappear. He didn't speak. He didn't stand. He didn't defend me. But he was 19 years old, and he was scared, and in that moment, I couldn't find it in my heart to blame him. I turned away from all of them. "Mrs. Miller?" Julia called after me. "Would you like me to try to rebook you on another flight?" "That won't be necessary," I said. "Thank you for your kindness." I picked up my navy suitcase, the one from my honeymoon, the one that still had a tiny stain from when Richard spilled wine on it in Venice, and walked away from the gate. Behind me, I heard Samantha's voice, high and mocking. "Bye, Mom. Don't forget to take your pills." Mark's laughter echoed across the terminal. I didn't look back. I didn't walk toward the exit. Anyone watching would have expected the abandoned old woman to shuffle toward the taxi stand, defeated, humiliated, ready to spend her last dollars on a desperate flight home. But I didn't go to the taxi stand. I walked toward the Continental Atlantic Executive Lounge. Richard's voice echoed in my memory as I walked. That last conversation on the porch, the fireflies blinking in the darkness, his hand gripping mine. "Ellie, you're the strongest person I've ever known. You built everything we have. Don't let anyone, not even our daughter, make you forget that." I hadn't forgotten. I reached the lounge entrance. A young man in a crisp uniform stood at the podium, checking credentials. He looked up as I approached, his expression polite but skeptical. I didn't blame him. I looked like what I was, a 62-year-old woman in a wrinkled dress dragging a 40-year-old suitcase. "May I help you, ma'am?" "My name is Eleanor Miller," I said. "I'm a shareholder." He hesitated. "A shareholder?" 8% of Continental Atlantic Airlines. Check your system." He typed my name. I watched his face change, the skepticism dissolving into something closer to alarm. He picked up the phone and spoke rapidly in Italian, then in English. Then he set down the phone and looked at me with entirely different eyes. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "please follow me. The executive team has been notified of your arrival. They're preparing the private terminal for you now." I smiled, the first real smile in 10 days. The private terminal was a world I'd almost forgotten existed. White leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. A silence so complete I could hear the soft hum of the climate control. A young woman in a tailored blazer appeared within seconds of my arrival, offering champagne on a silver tray. "Mrs. Miller, on behalf of Continental Atlantic, please accept our sincere apologies for any inconvenience you've experienced today." Her English was flawless, her smile practiced. "The regional director is on his way. Is there anything we can provide in the meantime?" "Privacy," I said, "and a phone charger." "Of course." She disappeared, and I was alone. I sat down in one of those white leather chairs and let myself breathe for the first time in hours. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the adrenaline of what I was about to do. I pulled out my phone and called Margaret. She answered on the first ring. "Eleanor, I've been waiting." "It's time," I said. "Activate everything." A pause. "You're certain? Once we do this, there's no going back." I thought of the text message still glowing on my phone. "Good luck walking home, you useless old hag." I thought of Mark's sneer, his voice carrying across the terminal. "First class is for people who actually have class. I'm certain." "All right," I heard her typing. "Give me 15 minutes. I'll call you when it's done." I hung up and stared out the window at the planes taxiing toward the runways. Somewhere out there, my daughter was boarding a flight home, confident that she'd won. That she'd left her useless old mother stranded in a foreign country, helpless and humiliated. She had no idea. Richard never wanted to tell Samantha about our money. I remembered the conversation we had when she was 25, just married to Mark, already showing signs of the entitlement that would consume her. We were sitting in the study, going over the quarterly trust statements, and I suggested we bring her in. Teach her about the family finances. Give her responsibility. Richard shook his head. "Not yet, Ellie. Maybe not ever. She's our daughter. She's our daughter, and I love her. But she thinks money is the same as worth." He set down the papers and looked at me with those tired, knowing eyes. "She married Mark because he told her he was going places. She stays with him because she thinks he'll make her rich. She doesn't understand that we're already—" He stopped himself. "We never said the number out loud. It felt like a jinx. She needs to learn," he continued, "that money doesn't make you worthy. Character does. Until she learns that, telling her about the trust would only make things worse." He was right. I knew it then, and I knew it now. Samantha never learned, and now she was about to get the education of a lifetime. My phone buzzed. A text from Samantha. "Mom, where did you go?" I didn't respond. Let me explain what Samantha didn't know, what almost no one knew. The Miller Family Trust was established in 1995 when Richard's first major investment paid off, $50 million held in an irrevocable trust, with me as the sole trustee. Richard insisted on that structure. "Trustees have power," he said. "Beneficiaries only have expectations." Samantha was a beneficiary. So was Tyler. So, through a subsidiary arrangement, Richard's lawyers set up to keep peace in the family were Patricia and Howard. Every month, distributions flowed from the trust into their accounts. Samantha and Mark received $12,000. Patricia and Howard received $8,000. They called it family money. They believed it was their birthright. In reality, it was my gift. A gift I could revoke at any time for breach of fiduciary duty, or for any reason I deemed appropriate, according to the trust documents Richard and I had carefully crafted. Then there was the airline stake. 8% of Continental Atlantic, acquired in 1987 when Richard's college roommate was trying to get a small regional carrier off the ground. That college roommate was now the chairman of the board. He still sent me a Christmas card every year, thanking Richard and me for believing in him when no one else would. 8% didn't sound like much, but Continental Atlantic was now one of the largest airlines in the country. That 8% was worth over $200 million. I didn't sit on any boards. I didn't attend shareholder meetings. I preferred my quiet life in Willow Creek, my old Buick, my magnolia tree. But when I called, people answered. Margaret called back exactly 14 minutes later. "It's done," she said. "All trust distributions are frozen, effective immediately. Every credit card tied to the trust accounts has been deactivated. I've also initiated the clawback provisions for Patricia and Howard. The forensic accountant found over $300,000 in unauthorized transfers over the past 4 years. Criminal referral goes to the DA's office on Monday. And Samantha's access to the properties? Revoked. The Charlotte house, the lake cabin, the Asheville rental, all of it requires trust authorization to access. She'll find that out when she tries to use her key." I closed my eyes. What about their tickets? The flight? Flagged for review by airline security. Standard protocol when there's a dispute involving a major shareholder. I could hear the grim satisfaction in Margaret's voice. "They won't be boarding that plane, Eleanor." The regional director arrived 20 minutes later, a silver-haired Italian man named Vittorio, who spoke with his hands and apologized profusely for the terrible misunderstanding at the gate. "Mrs. Miller, we had no idea you were traveling today. If we had known, none of this—" "It's all right," I said. "I prefer to travel quietly." Of course. He hesitated. "There is a situation, however, with the other passengers from your party." "A situation?" Vittorio pulled out a tablet and handed it to me. On the screen was a security feed from Gate 47, the gate where, 30 minutes ago, I had been publicly humiliated by my own family. The scene had changed. Samantha was standing at the boarding counter, her face twisted with confusion and rage. Mark was beside her, shouting at the gate agent, a different agent now, a man who looked unintimidated by Mark's performance. Behind them, 2 security officers stood with crossed arms. Their tickets were flagged during final boarding, Vittorio explained. When they attempted to resolve the issue, their payment methods were declined. All of them. The gentleman became aggressive, so security was called. On the screen, I watched them pull Samantha and Mark's luggage off the jet bridge, the same luggage I had paid to check. The designer suitcases Mark had insisted on buying for appearances. "They've been moved to a private waiting area," Vittorio continued. "We weren't sure how to proceed, given your relationship." I watched the screen for a long moment. Samantha was crying now, angry tears, not sad ones. Mark was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling Howard or Patricia for help. Help that wouldn't come. And there, in the corner of the frame, stood Tyler. He wasn't crying. He wasn't yelling. He was just standing there, staring at the floor, like a man watching his whole world collapse. "Mrs. Miller?" Vittorio asked. "What would you like us to do?" I handed back the tablet and stood up. "Bring them to me." Vittorio's eyebrows rose. "All of them?" "All of them." I smoothed the front of my navy dress, Richard's favorite, and straightened my mother's pearl earrings. They wanted to know where I went. Let's show them. For 62 years, I had been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. That ended today. They were brought to me, not the other way around. After a lifetime of silence, I was finally going to be heard. The door to the private terminal opened, and my daughter walked into a world she didn't recognize. I watched her face as she entered, the confusion first, then the slow dawning of something she couldn't quite name, fear, maybe, or the first crack in a lifetime of certainty. The room was bright and silent, white leather chairs, champagne untouched on a silver tray, floor-to-ceiling windows flooding everything with Roman sunlight. And there, in the center of it all, sat her mother. Not the confused old woman she'd left at the gate, not the useless hag she'd dismissed with a text message, someone else entirely. "Mom," Samantha's voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. What is this? Mark came in behind her, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. His jacket was wrinkled. His carefully styled hair had fallen across his forehead. He looked like what he was, a man whose carefully constructed facade had just collapsed. Eleanor. He said my name like an accusation. What the hell did you do? They pulled us off the plane. Our cards don't work. They took our luggage. Sit down, Mark. He stopped mid-sentence. I don't know what he saw in my face, but it was enough to make him obey. Samantha remained standing. Tyler slipped in last, pressing himself against the wall near the door like he was trying to disappear into it. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at me once, then looked away. Someone needs to explain what's happening, Samantha said. Her voice was finding its edge again, the sharp tone she used when she wanted to remind everyone she was in charge. This is insane. We have rights. You can't just what? I asked. Cancel your ticket without warning? Leave you stranded in a foreign country? Send you a message calling you a useless old hag? The words hung in the air between us. Samantha's mouth opened, then closed. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she had nothing to say. Sit down, Samantha. She sat. I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to feel it, the weight of everything that had led to this moment. 3 years of grief, 6 months of investigation, 10 days of documented cruelty. Finally, I spoke. I know about the competency paperwork. Samantha flinched. Mark went pale. I know Howard drafted it. I know you were planning to file it within 2 weeks of returning home. I know you've been telling everyone, Patricia, your friends, probably anyone who would listen, that your poor mother is losing her mind. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, the copies I'd made. I set them on the table between us. I've known for 6 months. Samantha stared at the folder like it was a snake. Mom, that's not... We were just trying to protect you. Protect me? I almost laughed. You were trying to steal from me. You were going to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could seize control of the trust, so you could sell the properties, so you could live off money you never earned and never deserved. That's not fair, Mark cut in. We've been part of this family for 15 years. We've contributed... What have you contributed, Mark? I turned to face him fully. Your salary at the investment firm? The one you were fired from 8 months ago? The color drained from his face. Oh, yes. I know about that, too. I know you've been pretending to go to work every day while actually meeting with Howard to plan how to access my accounts. I know you owe $140,000 in personal debts you've been hiding from my daughter. I know you married her because you thought her family had money and you've spent 15 years waiting to get your hands on it. Samantha turned to Mark. What is she talking about? You told me the firm was restructuring. You said, Samantha, let me handle this. Handle this? Samantha's voice rose. You lost your job 8 months ago and you didn't tell me? I was going to tell you after we secured the trust. He stopped. The words were out before he could catch them. Samantha stared at him. I watched something shift behind her eyes. Not redemption, not yet, but the first fracture in their united front. My phone rang. The screen showed Patricia's name. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Patricia. Eleanor. Her voice was shrill, panicked. Something's wrong with my accounts. The bank says they've been frozen. Howard's too. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake. Silence on the line. I know about the transfers, Patricia. $312,000 over 4 years, moved from trust accounts into your personal holdings. Howard was very clever about it, but not clever enough. I paused. My lawyers have already contacted the district attorney. You should probably call yours. I hung up. Samantha and Mark sat frozen, watching me like they were seeing me for the first time. You can threaten lawyers all you want, I said. But Margaret Holloway has been preparing for this for 6 months. Every document is in order. Every transfer is documented. Every cruel word, every exclusion, every humiliation from this trip. I have records of all of it. Samantha's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, angry tears, frustrated tears, the tears of someone who has finally lost control of a situation she thought she owned. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "We're your family. I'm your daughter." "Yes," I said, "you are, and that's what makes this so painful." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, planes were taking off into the blue Roman sky, carrying people home to lives I would never know. "Your father warned me," I said quietly. "Before he died, he told me you thought love was a transaction, that you measured people by what they could give you." I turned back to face her. I didn't want to believe him. I thought if I just loved you enough, if I just gave you enough, you'd learn. I shook my head. "I was wrong. You don't learn generosity from receiving. You learn it from earning, from struggling, from building something yourself." Mark started to speak. I held up my hand. "I'm not interested in anything you have to say, Mark. You married my daughter for money. You schemed to steal from an old woman. And you called me—" My voice caught just for a moment. "You called me a useless old hag in front of strangers, in front of my grandson." I looked at Tyler then. He was still pressed against the wall, tears streaming silently down his face. "Tyler," I said softly, "come here." He hesitated. Samantha reached out to grab his arm, but he pulled away and walked toward me on unsteady legs. "Grandma," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I knew something was wrong, and I didn't. I should have—" "Shh." I took his hand. His fingers were cold and trembling. "You're 19 years old. You were scared. I understand. I wanted to tell you. That night on the terrace, I know. I saw it in your eyes." He broke then, sobbing like the child he still partly was. I pulled him into my arms and held him while his parents watched in silence. "You have your grandfather's eyes," I whispered, "and I hope his heart. You made a mistake, but you're young enough to learn from it." I released him and turned back to Samantha. She looked smaller somehow, deflated. The polished, confident woman who had mocked me at the gate was gone, replaced by someone I almost recognized, the frightened little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "I'm not cutting you off forever," I said, "but you're going to learn what it means to earn something. The trust distributions are frozen. The properties are off limits. The credit cards are canceled. You're going to live on what you actually have, which I suspect isn't much." "Mom, please." "This isn't a punishment, Samantha. It's a lesson. The same lesson your father tried to teach you and I was too soft to enforce." I picked up my bag. "When you're ready to talk, really talk, without schemes, without lawyers, without Mark whispering in your ear, you know where to find me." I walked toward the door. Vittoria was waiting outside to escort me to my private flight home. "That taxi Mark mentioned," I said, without turning around. "It's waiting outside. I suggest you hurry. It's the last thing I'm ever paying for." I left them there, in that beautiful sunlit room, surrounded by the wreckage of their plans. Behind me, I heard Samantha starting to cry. I didn't look back. 6 months later, the magnolia tree bloomed again. I stood at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee, hot this time, not cold, and watched the white petals catch the morning light. Spring had come early to Willow Creek. The air smelled like fresh earth and possibility, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread the silence of my empty house. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. I still drove the old Buick with the dent in the bumper. I still used coupons at the grocery store. I still wore the same pearl earrings my mother gave me and dabbed lavender lotion on my wrists every morning. Some things don't need to change, but other things do. Patricia and Howard's trial was scheduled for September. The district attorney had taken a personal interest in the case, something about making an example of elder financial abuse. Margaret called it poetic justice. I called it accountability. $312,000 in fraudulent transfers, plus the attempted competency scheme. Howard was facing up to 15 years. Patricia, as a co-conspirator, was looking at 5 to 7. Their marriage didn't survive the indictment. Howard blamed Patricia for pushing him into the scheme. Patricia blamed Howard for getting caught. The last I heard, they were living in separate apartments on opposite sides of Charlotte, communicating only through lawyers. I didn't feel sorry for them. I tried to once, lying awake at 3 in the morning, wondering if I'd been too harsh. Then I remembered Howard's eyes lingering on my filing cabinet, Patricia's voice dripping with false concern. "You seem forgetful lately, Aunt Eleanor." No, they made their choices. Now they were living with the consequences. Mark and Samantha's consequences were different, but no less severe. They moved out of their 4-bedroom colonial in Myers Park 3 months after Rome. Couldn't afford the mortgage without the trust distributions. Couldn't afford the car payments, the club memberships, the private school tuition they'd been planning for a child they didn't have yet. Now they lived in a 2-bedroom rental in a part of Charlotte they used to drive through with their windows up. Samantha worked at a department store, retail, something she'd once mocked as beneath her. Mark had found a job at a small accounting firm, entry level, a fraction of what he used to pretend to earn. Their marriage, predictably, was crumbling. Margaret kept me informed through the legal grapevine. Apparently, Samantha had discovered the full extent of Mark's deceptions, the gambling debts she didn't know about, the lies that went back years before Rome. She'd filed for separation in February. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. Mostly, I just felt tired. And then there was Tyler. Tyler was the reason I still had hope. He worked at the Miller Family Foundation now, the charitable arm of the trust that Richard and I had established 20 years ago. We funded scholarships for first-generation college students, grants for small businesses in underserved communities, emergency assistance for families facing medical bankruptcy. Tyler started in the mailroom. Minimum wage. His choice, not mine. "I need to learn from the bottom," he told me when he applied. "I need to understand what this money actually does, what it means to people who don't have it." I cried when he said that. Right there in my living room, tears streaming down my face while my 19-year-old grandson handed me a tissue and pretended not to notice. 6 months later, he'd been promoted twice. Not because of his name, I made sure of that, but because he showed up early, stayed late, and treated every scholarship recipient like they were the most important person in the world. He had Richard's work ethic, Richard's heart, the man my husband could have been if he'd had to struggle for anything in his youth. I visited Tyler at the foundation office on a Thursday in April. He was reviewing applications at his desk, a small desk in a shared office, nothing fancy, when I knocked on the door. "Grandma!" He stood up quickly, almost knocking over his coffee. "I didn't know you were coming." "Surprise inspection," I said, smiling. "Take me to lunch." We walked to a small diner 2 blocks from the office. Tyler ordered a grilled cheese and tomato soup, Richard's favorite, and told me about the scholarship recipients he'd been working with. A young woman from Gastonia who wanted to be a nurse, a single father in Concord going back to school at 42. "They're incredible, Grandma," he said, his eyes bright. "They work so hard, harder than anyone I knew at prep school, and they're so grateful for the help. It makes me realize how much I took for granted." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you." Tyler's eyes glistened. "I hope so. I think about him a lot, about what he would say if he could see." He trailed off. "If he could see how everything turned out." He'd say you're exactly where you need to be. We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Tyler set down his spoon and looked at me with an expression I recognized, Richard's expression when he was about to say something important. "Mom called me last week." I kept my face neutral. "Oh?" "She's in therapy now, has been for 2 months. She said—" He hesitated. "She said she's starting to understand some things, about herself, about why she became the way she did." "And Mark?" "He moved out. They're getting divorced." Tyler shrugged, but I could see the pain beneath his careful composure. "I think it's for the best. He never really loved her, not the way Grandpa loved you. I nodded slowly. How do you feel about all of it? Sad, angry sometimes, but mostly. He looked out the window at the street, where ordinary people were living ordinary lives. Mostly, I feel grateful that you didn't give up on me, that you gave me a chance to be different. I stood up, walked around the table, and hugged my grandson. You were always different, Tyler. You just needed permission to show it. And the letter from Samantha arrived on a Tuesday. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope, the same looping cursive she'd learned in 3rd grade, the same way she'd addressed her letters home from summer camp. I set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for 3 days. On Friday morning, I finally opened it. Mom, I don't know how to start this. I've written this letter 100 times and thrown away every version. Nothing sounds right. Nothing sounds like enough. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for Rome, for the things I said, for the things I let Mark say, for the person I became somewhere along the way without even noticing. I've been in therapy for 2 months now. Dr. Reeves says I have a lot of work to do. She says I built my whole identity around things that don't matter: money, status, appearances, and I have to learn who I am without them. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm not writing to ask for money. I don't want the trust back. I'm not even sure I want what I had before anymore. I just want to talk to you. Really talk. Like we used to when I was little, before I forgot how. I know I don't deserve it, but if you're willing, I'll be at the Magnolia Cafe on Saturday at 10 a.m. I'll wait for an hour. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember what that means. Samantha. I read the letter 3 times, then I folded it carefully, put it in my purse, and got in the Buick. The Magnolia Cafe was a small place on the edge of downtown, the kind of restaurant Samantha used to dismiss as quaint. When I walked in on Saturday morning, she was already there. She looked different, thinner, older, no designer clothes, just jeans and a simple blouse I didn't recognize. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, no highlights, no careful styling. She looked like the girl I remembered from 20 years ago, before Mark, before the money, before everything went wrong. She stood up when she saw me. Her eyes were red. Mom, you came. I came. We sat across from each other in a small booth by the window. The waitress brought us coffee. Neither of us touched it. I don't know where to start, Samantha said. Start with the truth. So she did. She talked for an hour about her marriage, her mistakes, her fear that she was becoming someone she hated, about the therapy sessions where she cried so hard she couldn't breathe, about the moment she realized she had treated me, her own mother, like an obstacle to be overcome instead of a person to be loved. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't forgive. Not yet. Forgiveness would take time, if it came at all. But when she finished, tears streaming down her face, I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm not giving you money, I said. I'm not giving you the house back. I'm not making this easy. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. But I'm not giving up on you either. I squeezed her hand. If you're willing to do the work, real work, not performances, I'll be here. We can rebuild, slowly, honestly. Samantha broke down then, sobbing like she hadn't since she was a child. I moved to her side of the booth and held her while she cried. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't absolution, but it was a door left open. I drove home as the afternoon sun painted the sky gold and amber. The magnolia tree was blooming in my front yard, white petals scattered across the lawn like confetti. I parked the Buick and sat there for a moment, my hands on the wheel, looking at the house Richard and I had shared for 40 years. Then I got out, walked around to the back bumper, and ran my fingers over the dent he'd left the week before he died. I think I finally understand, Richard, I whispered. What you were trying to tell me. The evening breeze rustled through the magnolia branches, and for just a moment I could almost hear his voice. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, Ellie. It's what you teach them to build. Some lessons can only be taught the hard way, and some people, no matter how lost, can still find their way home.